DFS podcast. I am Dan Malin. Many thanks to Ed Rouse for covering for me last week, but I am joined, as always, by Matt Selz. He is our FSWA three-time NASCAR Writer of the Year. Matt, how you doing? How did you enjoy the first race of the 2023 playoffs for the Cup Series?
I thought that was a great Darlington race. I thought it was fantastic. Tire wear definitely played a role in that race. We saw a bunch of different grooves working. It was not just a runaway like some folks it thought you could actually pass too, which was pretty nice. And the winner of the race was in the playoffs, unlike last year where the first four races of the playoffs were won by drivers not in
Yeah,
the playoffs.
2022 was so weird with all the different race winners, and then the playoffs started with four different winners that weren't even in the playoffs. It was such an odd season for the next gen car.
It was. So the playoffs got off to a rip roaring start. I thought it was a pretty good race. Now we turn our attention to a track that had just a phenomenal race earlier this year. Um, One of the best races in recent memory, to be honest. That
I
Kansas
think you
race.
can make that argument pretty much every race at Kansas since they introduced the next gen car. Like this car races really well. You can pass. You can get multiple leaders. The Toyotas have dominated. They've won all three races at Kansas since they introduced the next gen car. Very excited for this race this weekend. It just kind of sucks that it falls on week one of NFL Sunday.
It does, and we saw some drivers in attendance at the Chiefs Lions game. Uh, on Thursday.
Mhm.
Keselowski was definitely there cheering on his home state Lions. So it's pretty. I don't know if they timed it, but it works pretty well that you have the start of NFL about I don't know 15 miles down the road from one of the great NASCAR tracks in the playoffs there. So we'll see. But you want to know something interesting? This is the first time since Memorial Day weekend that the Cup Series is on a 1.5 mile track.
I did catch that because as I was doing some early work, and I was even when I was working on the Xfinity playbook, I'm like, I was looking at the tracks they've run this year, and I'm like, there just aren't that many like tracks that the Xfinity series has run that correlate
Right.
to Kansas. And it's like they have Vegas, they have
Yep.
Charlotte, and then pretty much they run a ton of road courses and short flat tracks. So I can see why AJ Allmendinger probably wants to go back to that series. But yeah, it is kind of crazy that these cookie cutter intermediates are supposed to be like the bread and butter of NASCAR, or at least they were
Right.
for most of NASCAR scheduling in previous years, and it's kind of wild that it's been over 3 months since we've been to
Yeah,
an
you have to
intermediate.
go back to the Coke 600 for the last time. Now, does that mean that we haven't been on an intermediate? No, I mean I think technically you could consider Michigan to be a 2 mile intermediate, right?
Nashville,
Darlington is an intermediate; it's not 1.5 miles.
yeah.
Nashville, not quite 1.5 miles. So you have some that are close, but a true 1.5 mile track hasn't been raced in the Cup Series since Memorial Day weekend as the capstone to, um, the greatest day in racing. So that was interesting to me. But there are tracks that we can, compare. I know some sites are telling you, well, you can only really compare Charlotte and Texas and Kansas and Vegas together. I don't think so. I think Michigan races like Kansas. I think you can take a little bit from Homestead because it's a multi-groove track.
Yeah.
I think you can take a little bit from Nashville because Kansas is a little bit flatter of a mile and a half than some others are. So I think we can get a little bit interesting with our comps this week.
Okay. So let's talk practice and qualifying. They happened early Saturday afternoon. Two cars, I believe they both had the same issue as Kyle Busch, Ty Gibbs.
Yes.
Both had tires go down. They both tagged the wall. Gibbs is definitely going to a backup car.
Correct.
He will start at the rear. Kyle Busch is going to start pretty far back anyway. He's not going to a backup car. I think that tells me that they loved the speed that they had in the initial car, and they don't want to risk
Well, they
losing
should.
that.
That car was fast before
Right.
he.
So was Austin Dillon. So Richard Childress Racing did something to set these cars up pretty well.
Right. So yeah, Kyle Busch will start 35th. Ty Gibbs will start 36th. It is a little, and Kyle Busch kind of alluded to it in his post crash interview. He was like, "Well, we have their data, and you had two different manufacturers using that data referring to Goodyear and have tires go down. So there's some questions as to whether or not the floor for the PSI is too low right now that Goodyear told them, because it's not two JGR cars that went down.
Right.
It's an RCR car and a JGR car, so a Toyota and a Chevy, which is a little disconcerting. Kyle Busch did not take a qualifying lap, so he will start 35th and be counted as 35th. Now, do we want to turn our attention to William Byron, who had a part break on his car in the right front suspension, if I believe it's a bolt that I guess goes to the upper control arm, I think is what they were saying. That appeared to break during practice, and he wasn't sure if they were going to fix it in time to take a qualifying lap. They did. He took qualifying laps. He will start 9th. Then there was a debate as to whether that counted as an unapproved adjustment, which is huge for us, because if it counts as an unapproved adjustment, he would have to drop to the rear at the start of the race, but still be scored from P9.
From 9th, yeah.
However, thank you, NASCAR, for not counting it as an unapproved adjustment and counting it as fixing a part that broke and not tweaking the car. So he gets to start 9th and be scored from 9th and not have to drop to the rear. So,
and those Hendrick cars are quite sporty.
What?
The Hendrick cars are pretty sporty this week too. Like Larson's on the front row, Chase Elliott qualified well, and Byron's also in the top 10.
Yeah,
I don't really know.
Bowman.
I don't know what's wrong with Bowman.
His back is still wrong with Alex Bowman. I don't know. Now the downside to that is I think his DFS ownership just went. Byron, that is, went through the roof now.
For sure.
Because he will start 9th and be scored that way, as opposed to be scoring 9th but start 36th and have to get back to 9th to get you positive PD. Now he gets to start 9th, and if he moves up to 8th off the jump, you're getting positive PD. So things are. It was a weird qualifying session, to be honest, for DFS. Like,
especially because in the regular session, Ross Chastain laid down such a great qualifying lap.
It was like a second faster than anybody. It was insane.
It was wild. And so he gets into the top 10, then doesn't lay down as good of a lap in like the final round of qualifying, but he still gets to start top 10. And so I don't really know what to make of that. But then you chimed in the NASCAR DFS Discord, and you said of all the 1.5 mile intermediate tracks that they've run in the next gen car, Ross Chastain is the only driver to complete every lap. And so now I have the internal struggle of trying to decide, do I want to play Ross Chastain on Sunday, or do I want to leave Ross Chastain out of my player pool, which is what I've done the last couple months since he won at Nashville, and it's done okay.
Right. So to be clear, that is for 9 races. It's the 1.5 mile intermediate. So we're not talking about Darlington or Nashville or Michigan, or if you want to count home,
you're talking Vegas, Texas, Charlotte, Kansas,
and Homestead.
Okay.
Is also 1.5 mile intermediate. So if you count those, he's completed every lap, and he's the only one to finish on the lead lap and complete every lap in all 9 races, which is interesting given his history of, causing mayhem on the track.
Yeah.
However, doesn't necessarily mean he's finished better than he's started in every one of those. He's just racing at the end. So I guess it helps more for FanDuel to get those tenths of points added to your score.
Well, let's dive into Sunday's race. We have 5 drivers that are priced at $10,000 or above. We have Denny Hamlin. The car looks fine. He just didn't make the final round of qualifying. He's $11,000.
That's fine. He didn't start in the top 10 in May when he won it anyway. So
yeah, so he starts P14. Martin Truex Jr. is 10,700. Looks pretty good in the long run. He is P3. Kyle Larson, 10,500. Also looked good in the long run, and he's coming off his first career Cup Series win at Darlington. William Byron, who we've touched on, is 10-2. He starts P9. And Christopher Bell is back on the pole for the second straight week. Didn't really get to take advantage of that shiny new pit crew that he had last week at Darlington. He started on the pole for that race as well. Finished 23rd, but did lead 40 laps. Are we just expecting him to, I guess, turn it around and have a much better week this week? Do you think he can lead the entire first stage?
That's an excellent question. By the way, I don't know if you can hear the background thudding happening. My neighbor's bumping music to his boat, his driveway, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my neighbors are moving out above me, so
Yeah, I am not at a rave, um, although my neighbor apparently thinks he is. Um, I don't know. This is an interesting pricing scheme. The way that this broke out. Um, if DK knew what they were doing, then they're geniuses. If they just lucked into it, well, then good for them. I don't know if Bell leads the whole first stage.
I would with his
I don't
teammate
think he
starting behind
does.
him and Larson starting next to him. I don't think he does either. I don't know if he can manage tires in the long run as well as the other two.
Also, Reddick was fast on the long run too, and he's starting fifth.
Right.
So he's got some real quick cars on the long run that's behind him. And Bell has never been a guy to be a front runner. Like, if he's on the pole in his career, he usually doesn't do all that great in the race. Doesn't mean we're avoiding him for the. No. I think in GPPs you play him. I think in cash you avoid him. Same thing as a normal bull sitter on an intermediate track. But I think the way that this qualifying wound up is setting up to be very interesting for how to build lineups. Because I'm either going to write up like 8 dudes in the playbook or I'm writing up everybody in the playbook. I haven't fully figured it out yet. Because, like, I don't know. If you can make a case for Seabell, you can make a case for Larson, Truex, Reddick, Chastain, theoretically. Right? There's the top 6. Okay. I don't know how we're splitting hairs between these guys this week.
That's fair. Do you want to just, I guess, cast a wide net and just give a blanket discussion on the Fords because they looked terrible in practice and qualifying? They only have one driver starting in the top 10. That's Michael McDowell. I'm kind of
By the way,
operating.
would not have been my pick for the Fords to starting in the
It probably could have been Kevin Harvick. And honestly, Chase Briscoe didn't have a terrible speed in practice, although he didn't really, I don't think he made a 15-lap run. But I
it
probably
was almost Logano. I guess he's starting 11th, but like they kind of look mid.
Yeah, they didn't look very good, which is surprising because they were pretty good. They had great speed in practice and qualifying last week at Darlington.
Yes, they did. Now I would be careful because Darlington eats tires and Kansas eats substantially less tires than that. But I am a little surprised at Ryan Blaney starting 17th. This is a track he's been really quick at previously, and he flat out dominated the Coke 600 at a fairly comparable Charlotte race. So I am a bit surprised to see him starting 17th. I think there's a decent amount of people that will wind up playing him, especially in that 8K range, because I think he's the one you can make the best argument for aside from Chase Elliott.
But Blaney was also
he was slow in practice,
he was
though, too.
Slow in practice.
Like, I am waffling between putting him in the playbook, to be honest. I've had him in.
I don't blame you.
Him out. I've had him in. I've taken him out. Like, because part of me is like, well, he won at Charlotte, and nobody expected that. And then part of me is like, yeah, but they've had bad speed this week. So, like, and it's Ryan Blaney. He always finds ways to screw stuff up. Sorry, Rouse, but, like, that's true.
Would you rather go to any of the RFK guys? Busher is priced at 8,600, starting P13. Keselowski is 8,300. Blaney is sandwiched right between them. Would you feel better about those two Ford drivers?
It's kind of interesting because we got a Penske sandwich and an RFK sandwich, right? Because you got Logano, then Busher, then Blaney, then Kez.
Oh, yeah.
2 Penske's, and then you got 2 RFK. I feel better about the RFK team. Like, they're just consistently quick.
Yeah, Busher. We live in a day and age where Chris Busher now has 3 wins in one season.
Right. He's also, I think if we were still using the old point system, I think he's 3rd or 4th in points.
Damn good year for him.
Points, and Kez is 4th in points, something like that. Like, they've been consistent all year. I'm fine. I don't know which one to tell you to play. Because I feel like the cars are so identical. Every time I think Kez has the upper hand, that Busher just shows up, and I don't know if they're giving slightly more to Busher because he's higher in the points. But those cars are good. That might be my standout Ford team. I don't think it's any. I don't think it's. What am I trying to say? They're clearly the best Ford team in the garage, and I don't think that there's really an issue with that argument.
Go ahead.
That they're just the best one. I mean, Penske's not been good most of the year. SHR, you can count on Kevin Harvick, and that's it.
Yeah. Fair. I do feel bad because we did kind of gloss over like the elephant in the room, and that is Kyle Busch at 9,600. He starts P35. We then have Ty Gibbs at 7,600. He starts P36. We mentioned at the top of the show that Busch and Gibbs had issues in practice. Are you just plugging these guys into your cash game lineups, kind of setting it and forgetting it, eating the chalk, and then all right, and are you okay playing them in tournaments, or would you rather leverage them? Because Gibbs had a very, very fast car prior to the tire going down and getting into the wall, as did Busch. But Busch is at least going to try and fix his car, and Gibbs is going to a backup. Gibbs going to a backup, you don't really care. He starts dead last, can't get you negative points. You just okay rolling him out.
I mean, the backups nowadays are the same as the primaries, just unwrapped, right?
And it's not like it's a backup from maybe Colleague or
right. It's a JGR.
It's a JGR backup.
So like, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think in a cash game, you're plugging in Kyle Busch and Ty Gibbs, and you're having fun with a lot of leftover salary from there on out. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't play them in cash. Now, the tournament angle is an interesting one. I'm higher on Ty Gibbs in tournaments than Kyle Busch. I think you leverage Kyle Busch.
Well, I mean, he saves you $2,000 as well.
Right.
And Busch has been on a very
unlucky streak.
Just hasn't had a good run since, I guess, his last win.
It also concerns me that they're trying to fix that. Like, you're not going to take a qualifying run, so why try to fix the car?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. If he did some, I'm sure they looked it over, right? But let's say he bends something that makes the car handle a little differently, and then it's more likely to break rather than getting a brand new, untouched backup out. I don't know. I'm more comfortable with Gibbs in tournaments than Kyle Busch in tournaments.
Yeah, I'm probably with you there. Alex Bowman, 7,800 P23. What are we doing?
I don't know what he's doing.
I'm kind of operating under the assumption that most people will just see the name recognition, they'll see the price tag, and they'll just plug him in. I don't really know if I want to go that route. I'd rather, I guess, avoid that chalk and maybe. I can't believe I'm saying this. I'd rather just go to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting P16.
Yep.
Or Eric Jones. I don't know.
Both of whom are in the playbook.
What?
Shocker.
Good guess by me. Let's dip into the value tier. It's kind of a hard range to read. I did mention that I like Chase Briscoe a little bit, and I know we did say that the Fords are terrible. They all look pretty slow in practice. Briscoe, I think in his 5 and 10 lap averages was top 15 in speed, and he's only 6,600 and he starts P26. So when a guy starts P26 and the practice speeds were telling me that he had arguably a top 15 car, I'm inclined to play him. And he's also a guy who has bad luck as well. And I don't know if he's necessarily a great tire manager. He did have some good finishes and a win in the Xfinity Series at a track like Darlington. But I think that I'll go to Briscoe this week. I kind of like the value.
I do too. By the way, in a cash game lineup, I just plugged in Kyle Busch and Ty Gibbs, and then I went with Larson. And then you get some fun choices. I went with Suarez, LaJoy, and Chase Elliott.
It's not bad.
1,100.
I have a similar lineup for that DraftKings Survivor contest. I went with Busch and Gibbs, just ate the chalk because that contest is essentially finish in the top half every week and you move on. So it's a cash game. And so right. I went. So I currently have Busch and Gibbs, but then I went with two dominators with Larson and Truex, just because they both had. I liked the long run speed that they showcased in practice, and then I went Briscoe and Ty Dillon, who I wanted to get to and talk about because he starts outside the top 30. And I can't believe we're going to dedicate time to Ty Dillon on this podcast. But he starts outside the top 30. He's the cheapest driver in the field. And it was discovered on Twitter earlier this week when a fan was doing a tour of Richard Childress Racing's facility that Ty Dillon's car was just sitting there in the garage and they had the hood up and they were working on it. And it became kind of public knowledge that Ty Dillon's car has been set up by RCR the last few weeks.
Interesting.
Did you see that?
I did not. I missed it, but then again, I've been like.
But it makes sense because he's Richard Childress' grandson.
I mean, it would be weird if like one of them was an RCR car and the other one, one grandson got a perfectly spec RCR car and the other one had to go beat off scraps. So I guess that's good news. Do we think that he finds speed? Do we want to talk about last week when he put up 24 points because he had 30 fastest laps at Darlington?
Yeah, I also didn't watch last week's race. I had a previous commitment, but that is wild. I think he made the optimal lineup because of those 30 fastest laps.
Yes.
Was that just a thing where he got way off cycle and had?
He got off cycle and got new tires and just made fast laps. Because he started 26th, finished 29th, and put up 30 fastest laps. So he made optimal going backwards.
Good for him.
Which doesn't happen very often. But it's also back-to-back really good weeks. He's actually had sneaky good, he ran well at Michigan. He had a good road course.
Wasn't he top 20 in Michigan?
Yes.
Yeah. Good for him.
So you know what? You're turning my outlook around. I will add there's another guy that right up.
Well, because even at that price range where he's the only driver that's under 5K, and whenever I see a driver that's under 5K that starts outside the top 30, I'm not even asking them to hit 5x value and get 25 points. I'm like, if they can finish 28th, and I have the 2 or 3 guys that are nailing the Dominator points,
correct,
I could hit the optimal lineup, and he could just be in there getting me 15 to 18 points, and I'll be happy with it.
Ooh, I get Reddick. I get Reddick and Larson and Suarez and Ty Dillon and Gibbs and Bush.
It's a nice build.
I'll take it.
But as we explore this value tier a little bit more, are there any other drivers that kind of stick out to you? I want to believe in Justin Haley, 5,800. He starts P30. I think it's he has a top 25 car. I just don't know if there's much of a ceiling there. I also don't know if I really want to pay 5,800 for Justin Haley. He should probably be more like 52, 5,300.
Probably. I mean, I like the Todd Father. Hard not to like him at that price. He's got some PD. I think LaJoy is still starting in a spot where we can play him, even though he's starting 24th. He's run pretty well at 1.5 and intermediates of late.
And plus, if you think about it, this multi-groove track, let's assume that tires are not an issue tomorrow, even though they very well could be. Starting P24 isn't necessarily a bad thing if there are longer green flag runs, because that probably, and as long as he stays clean, it probably keeps him on the lead lap longer.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with Carson Hocevar.
What car is he in? The legacy car?
Yeah, but it looked reasonably quick at practice. And he did basically hold his spot at Darlington. He started 15th, finished 17th. So
I think you could probably expect him to do arguably the same thing in this race, and what I mean by that is he's probably finishing within 2 spots of where he starts. So he can either finish 19th and get 26 fantasy points, or he finishes 23rd and gets you 17 fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about putting him in the playbook yet because I don't know where the value upside is.
Yeah.
Because they jumped. I mean, he was 5,700 last week, and now he's 6,400. That seems like a pretty decent
jump
for a guy who did okay last week. I mean, he didn't even hit value last week. That's just a solid. He didn't kill you, but he also didn't add value. So So I don't know. It's just an interesting name to look at in that range. Austin Dillon is interesting, starting 8th too.
He is, because no one's going to really want to play him.
Right.
And it really boils down to, do you think he can finish top 10? And of course he can. But he's so cheap. What is he, 6,800?
6,800.
If he was to just hold his spot and finish where he starts, that's 36 points, and that's paying off his price tag.
Right.
And if he can just somehow finish 6th, that's 40. Who knows? Maybe even get a couple fastest laps if he gets on the right cycle. Really, though, like, as long as he finishes top 10, I'd be fine with it.
Right.
And he could do that. He's done it a couple times this year. But
I mean, let's put it this way: I'd rather play Austin Dillon than McDowell.
I probably would too. I have less faith in McDowell's equipment.
Correct.
Which I think you would, yeah.
Correct. I just don't see. He's been spending way too much time going backwards of late. I mean, Daytona, he moved up, but he started 39th, so there was nowhere for him to go but up, right? He won the road course, okay, but he's a road racer.
Yeah.
If we go and look at more standard races, started 9th and moved back to 32nd last week at Darlington. Not a great day. Moved back one spot at Michigan, moved back at the Cookout 400, moved backwards at the High Point 400, which was Pocono. You know, it just hasn't been a great run. Even at Charlotte, it's not like he did very much. So I just don't trust this equipment starting 7th. And like I said, there's no way I would have guessed that McDowell would have been the highest qualifying Ford coming into this weekend.
We have a few minutes left. Do you have any tips or strategies for constructing lineups, assuming there are enough laps in this race to just go and get 2 to 3 dominators in your lineup?
Yeah, I would say we're looking at a 2 dominator build. I feel like the race is kind of trending that way. You may have a few guys that are going to lead 20 or so laps, but I think there's really only 2 that are going to really lead enough to make a huge difference in your lineups. Kansas is a track where you can drive anywhere, move up pretty well. So track position is not. We're not really a slave to track position here like we are at, say, Vegas or Darlington last week. The May race was bonkers. It had everything. It had some wrecks. It had a bunch of passes for the lead under green flags. It had pit strategy. It was phenomenal. There was passing up and down the field basically the whole race. So you can go a lot of places with these builds this week. I feel like this is one of the more open build weeks that we've had based on how the pricing worked out and how qualifying worked out. I mean, you heard there's 5 guys above 10K and 3 of them are starting in the top 3. And all of them have a case to lead laps. Byron's got a shot to lead laps here starting 9th. He could dominate. Denny Hamlin won this race. He's starting 14th. He won it in May, and he started basically right about there. So it's a pretty wide open week, which is why I'm unsure of exactly who's in the playbook right now. And it's 5:30 on Saturday afternoon.
Well, Matt, we will let you get away and finish the NASCAR DFS playbook for the Hollywood Casino 400. Thank you so much for your time, as always, and best of luck to you for Kansas, and best of luck to the FA Nation.
Best of luck.